So welcome everybody to another presentation of the online ColdFusion Meetup. I'm Charlie Earhart and I'll be your host for the next hour or so. And in this edition of the Meetup, our 305th, being recorded on Thursday, January 18th, 2024 at noon U.S. Eastern Time. I'll be presenting again. Glad to be here. And this time I'll give a talk updating the Java underlying ColdFusion, considering it and doing it. So glad to be here. And before I get started, let me remind folks that if you want to share the word about the meetup, it's available at coldfusionmeetup.com. And this meeting and all of our meetings since 2015 are available on YouTube at recordings.coldfusionmeetup.com. That'll take you to a page that lists them. And actually, it even includes the ones going back to 2007, I think is when it started. Anyway, so, but the ones on YouTube are since 2015. All right. Well, let's go ahead and switch gears to the presentation. All right. So the talk is the title. There you go. And I'll say quickly, this is a reprisal of one I did in 2022. Some things have changed. There have been some, things worth mentioning. And also, more importantly, some of you may know that there was a new Java update just this week. And I thought, hey, it's been a couple years since I've done this talk. It's time to remind folks who care about this what are the issues. And so that's what this talk is about. And if you want to reach out to me, follow up with me in any way on social media, there you can see all the ways to reach me as well as my email address. And as I like to ask, just if somebody listening could pipe in to a drop a comment to confirm that y'all are hearing me. I'm going to presume that. I've been stopping previously, but I want to hold up people. There you go. Thank you. So the folks listening to the recording don't need to hear how that sausage is made. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So in this talk, we're going to talk first about broadly considering and planning for the update. And I just did a blog post this week, and I'll point to that in a moment. But in that post, I started out by saying, yes, installing a new Java version is itself very simple, but it's these other issues that sometimes people don't think about. So that's what this talk is about, is considering and planning for doing the JVM update. For instance, what is the current JVM that you currently run on whether you're running ColdFusion or Lucee, whether you're using CommandBox or not. We'll get into all that later. But it is helpful to know what JVM version do you currently have, and then also what can you update to. And I'll talk about how in the case of both ColdFusion and Lucee, you can't just go updating to the very latest major version of Java, which is technically called Java 21. We'll talk about that later. Now, I'm not saying you can't go to the latest available update to whatever version you're on. There's an 11.0.22 that came out this week, and an 8.0.401 and 17.0.10. Anyway, we'll talk about that later. Again, don't get confused right now. We'll talk about this later. And of course, why should you consider doing a JVM update? We'll talk about all those things. And then as far as doing the update, again, on the surface, it's pretty simple to do. Somebody might wonder, where am I supposed to even get this thing? Once I help persuade you that you should be paying attention to it, where do you get it? And there's a couple different places to get it. And then how do you install it? And there's actually a couple of choices of how to install it. And then how do you configure CF, and I should have said, or Lucee, to use it? So again, we'll cover those things. And then I also want to help you avoid various gotchas, and somebody could argue that the first two talks are all they need to hear, but trust me, there's a bunch of little things that can go wrong. And in particular, things that are changes in the JVM over the years where, depending on how far back it's been since you updated, for example, CF 2021 comes out of the box with 11.0.11. Well, 11.0.11 is from like 2 to 3 years ago. It's your job to update it. Well, since 11.0.11 came out, there have been some changes you should be aware of. Or even further, the original installer for CF 2021 came with 11.0.1, for goodness sakes, 11.0.1. And there's definitely been changes since. So I'm not really even here talking about language change impact. I'm not. I'm talking about how your CF or Lucee will run, and how the process of installing will go can vary based on these different variations. And some of them may affect virtually nobody, and then some may affect virtually everybody. So that's why we'd be talking about it. And then want to wrap up with, well, let's say I've persuaded you that all this is important to pay attention to. You might go, well, how am I supposed to know when these things come out? I'll show you how you can know there's a couple of different ways you can know. So finally, I want to say for those listening who say, well, I use command box, I don't really need to learn all this stuff because it takes care of it. I want to clarify, command box does simplify one of those points, how you get your command box instance to use a particular JVM. That is true. It makes that simple. But the rest of what I'm saying here applies to you. So don't think you're covered. You should still be listening. And then Lucy folks, I want to say again, nearly everything I say applies to you. There may be things where I talk about Lucy Cold Fusion Adobe specific, supported blah, blah, blah. Just saying, I'll try to also remember to mention the distinctions with Lucy. But, 90% of what I'm saying applies to everybody who cares to pay attention to these things. Now, granted, I'm not saying 90% of CF people pay attention to these things. And when I say CF, I mean CF or Lucy people. Most people are, blithely ignorant of this stuff, and they just either they're not responsible, or if they are responsible, they don't realize they're responsible. So anyway, that's what this talk is about, is to help get you motivated to pay attention to these sort of things. So real quickly about myself, for those who don't know, I'm not presuming everybody here has seen the talk from me before. So I just focus on server troubleshooting as an independent consultant. And when I say CF, I do mean CF or Lucy. And when I say server, I do mean either a server or a container or command box, whatever you're using. And the more important point is, it also doesn't matter what size organization you are and what level of experience you have. I help people of all these ranges just solving problems and do most of my work remotely. I probably should change this to be 100%. I think it's been several years since I've been on site with anybody. Anyway, so it's remote and safe and secure and easy via shared desktop. And I really do solve most problems in less than an hour. And I teach you as we go to help you not need me for that problem anymore. And sometimes to teach you things that you don't need me for other problems, because I'm helping to make you more and more capable of solving such problems. And bottom line is, if you don't find it valuable, you won't pay for it. It's as simple as that. So any problems you have, feel free to reach out. Again, the contact information is on the front page and the bottom right corner, as well as a reminder on every page. And you can find more about my rates and approach and all that stuff and my online calendar at my consulting page. But to be clear, I'm not selling anything in this session. I'm just here to help share knowledge that I and others have accumulated. And this presentation is also available online at carehart.org/presentations. I missed getting the chance to make a tweak to the link that's there. So if you click on it, you will see it, but I'll modify it to clarify the new one versus the old one. But anyway, let's move on. It's not important that you get it. Just know that you don't have to write down everything you see here. You'll be able to get the slides later. And I give you a list of links at the end, which will remind you of the URL to that slide. All right, moving on. So, considering planning the update. So first I want to make people aware that there are many different, quote, current versions of Java. And this gets really confusing if you're new to this stuff. And let me just tell you, there's, sorry, I just don't remember if I don't list them there. There's currently what are called LTS, or long-term support versions, LTS. And those are, believe it or not, the versions that I'm going to talk about Oracle, by the way, because Adobe formally supports Cold Fusion running on Oracle. Lucy people can use OpenJDK. Adobe people could, but they, formally Adobe says they only support the Oracle JDK. We'll talk about that stuff in a moment. But let me just say about the versions. Java versions, there's currently, both for Oracle and OpenJDK, 4 LTS versions, 8, 11, 17, and 21. You might go, wait, what? And that's because back in 2019, the Java environment changed to going to 6-month release cycles. So it was, sometimes months and years between version updates. Between 7 and 8 was a few years, for example. But then, and there were often just little hot fixes here and there. But the point is, they decided back at several years ago to start doing 6-month updates. 6-month versions. 6-month versions. So 9 was followed by 10. 8 was followed by 9, and then 10, both 6 months apart, living only for 6 months. And then 11 came out. And then there was a 12 and a 13 and a 14 and a 15 and a 16. And then 17 came out. And I'm just saying, the formally supported, what are called long-term support versions, the ones that get updates from the Java community project and Oracle, is 8, 11, 17, and 21. So just be aware of that. There are indeed many different current versions. And you might hear the term Java versus JVM versus JDK versus JRE. And these days, really, you can just regard it all as those being the same thing. There's some subtleties about JDK versus JRE, but it's even blurred since Java 11. There is no more JRE separate installer. You get the JDK installer and it includes a JRE, and it doesn't even have a folder called JRE. So again, let's not get lost in the weeds here. I'm just saying, by and large, when you see these words and you wonder, well, is there a difference? By and large, no, just regard them as all the same thing. And JVM means Java Virtual Machine. So Java is the big picture tent, JVM's the virtual machine within the tent, and the JDK and the JRE are particular implementations. And it used to be literally separate installers, but they aren't anymore. So just don't worry about that. And then I mentioned Oracle. And now there is this open JDK. So Oracle did some years ago decide to open source Java. So they have their Oracle Java, and then they released to open source what has generally been called the Open JDK. And some of you may know that there's different vendors that provide different Open JDKs. Amazon's got one, and Microsoft's got one. And so there are a lot of different Open JDK implementations, and they're free. And Oracle's is paid. Now, I can't remember if I covered this in a particular point, but let me just say it now while it's on top of my head. Some of you know Oracle had a free implementation, and then I think it was in 2019, they switched with Java 11 to saying you got to pay for it. And at that time in 2019, Adobe came out and with a blog post from Rakshith at the time saying, hey, don't worry, ColdFusion folks, Adobe has licensed Oracle Java for use with ColdFusion. So I just wanted to put that out there. Some of you will be in organizations where somebody's going to go, we can't use that Oracle Java. We got to pay for it. Not if you're using it with ColdFusion. So now, one more thing is that Oracle came out and with Java 17, they changed their plans and said, nope, it's now free again. So it gets really confusing. Trust me, I appreciate it. But look, bottom line for ColdFusion people, you don't have to worry about it. I know someone will tell you you do, you don't, and you can point them to this talk and other resources I've got. And again, I'll give you links at the end, and you can confirm through those means that, yeah, ColdFusion people don't need to pay Oracle to use ColdFusion, to use Java with ColdFusion. Now, I'm not saying that if you get Java and put it on a machine, you can use it for other things. Technically, no, it's to use Java with ColdFusion. How are they going to know? We're not getting into that. But anyway, moving on. So as far as what Java version do you currently have, well, I just want to point out in the ColdFusion Administrator, you can see what version it is. In fact, let me just quickly try to get some things set up in advance. And I do believe I didn't do this. So and let me get to, I have multiple browser windows open. There you go. So let me just get back to this. So I'll show you in a moment where in the CF admin, there is a page where you can see what Java version you're running. And that's helpful. And you should look at that. And you don't want to trust that you know what version it is. You don't want to go to the command line and type Java-version. I'm not going to show that because I'm telling you that's not the right way, because that says what your operating system thinks is the current version. And it might be that the path in your environment points to some particular Java, but I'll show you later how ColdFusion controls and Lucy controls, Tomcat controls, and CommandBox controls what version of Java the CFML engine uses. And that may not be the same one that when you go to the command line and type Java-version, you'll see. So by now it should be up and running. That's odd. It's usually pretty quick. So nope, still coming up. There you go. I have a bunch of stuff running. Don't worry about that. Let's not make any jokes. All right, so moving on. So, sorry, where's my mouse? There you go. So in the CF admin, and this is the CF 2023 admin, some of you who don't currently work with ColdFusion will go, wait, what? That doesn't look like the admin. Well, two things. One, it was changed in 2018 to look very different with these buttons down the left. And each of these buttons, when you mouse over them, those are the names of what used to be the sections on the left. And then what was within those sections on the left is now across the top. So in the first section, at the bottom of that section, the rightmost option, or sorry, at the bottom, now the rightmost option is called Settings Summary. Settings Summary. By the way, if you ever get lost in the admin and you're wondering, wait, where was that? You just click this little search button up here, and if I just type settings, and among those choices, there's Settings Summary. And I believe even if I say Java, yep, there it is, Setting Summary. So I'm just telling you, the Java version is on this Setting Summary. And by the way, you guys notice it just changed from black to white. I have a browser extension that says to make pages be dark. So the Adobe site, in the admin is not dark, but my browser is flickering back and forth between dark and light. Anyway, the bigger point is this Setting Summary page, it shows you what CF version you're on, and the version is the main numbers. I'm on CF 2023, and then the 6 is the current update that I'm on. So that's helpful. I know there's other places to see that, but this is a good authoritative thing to say, hey, this CF admin, this particular instance, and the instance name is up here. So this is my CFusion instance for those who know and care about that. Well, anyway, then just below that is Java version. So I'm currently running on 1709, and I did that intentionally. I'm going to go ahead and update this today in this talk, and we're going to go from 1709 to the current latest, with the 17010. Now, let me stop for a second and say, some of you are going, wait, what? We're on Java 11. So CF 2023 supports Java 17. And only CF 2023 supports Java 17. CF 2021 and 2018 only support Java 11. And Lucy currently only supports Java 11, doesn't yet support Java 17. So again, it gets annoying and confusing to keep all this stuff in your head. And in fact, let me say that I've got a table to help ColdFusion people, at least, and I created it a few years ago, but I keep it up to date. It's a blog post on the Adobe forum, Adobe portal, the CF portal, coldfusion.adobe.com. And I have this link in the slides at the end of the presentation, so you'll get this when you download the PDF. So you see, I posted originally in 2021, and I've kept it up to date. Well, anyway, if I just scroll down, so here's Java versions, and there's the Java 21, 17, 11, 8, 7, 6, and then the CF versions down the side. And I tell you, does 2023 yet support 21? No, it does not. Does CF 21? No, it does not. Does CF 2023 support Java 17? Yes, it does. Does 2021? No, it doesn't. Now, in May, Adobe may come out with an update where they'll say, yes, you can now move CF 2021 to run on Java 17. But for now, no, it only supports 11. So not 8, not 17, only 11. And then 2018, it supports Java 11. It originally came out with support for Java 10, which was one of those brief releases that only existed briefly. And they stopped doing any support for anything other than 11. So it doesn't support 8. And then 2016 came out originally on 8, and then they had an update. So, again, I know this can be confusing to people, but here's the information. And I keep it up to date, and just note this URL, and you'll be able to keep track. And in fact, just in case somebody's thinking, hey, I really want that right away, I'm going to share that in a comment. So I've just shared a comment in the chat, in the, you should be seeing it in YouTube. So anyway, but again, it'll be in the slides at the end, but it's a pretty important table, and I keep it up to date. And you guys who are still on really old versions, here's what they support. Now, we should be clear for everybody. You should not be running, sorry, let me do this. You should not be running these versions, because Adobe no longer updates these versions. 2018 last got its update in July of last year. 2016 got its last updates 5 years later in 2021. CF11 from 2014 got its last updates in 2019. So you really should not be on these old versions. Only these two are currently supported by Adobe and get updates. So let's move on. Okay. All right. So that's how you can see. Oh, and then let me just throw this out that Lucy doesn't currently in its interface show you what Java version you currently, I just can't remember. Somebody tell me if you know. I believe it doesn't show you. No, it does. It does. It doesn't show you the heap size. There was a conversation just today on the Lucy forum, and I only saw it briefly this morning, so I'm going to put that aside for the moment. But anyway, my focus is mostly on CF because this is where most of these questions come up for people. But there you go, the people that I help by and large. And there you go. What version can you update to? And then not. So we covered that. And then I want to repeat, if I didn't say it earlier, Adobe formally supports only Oracle Java. Now, could you run ColdFusion with some other JDK? Yeah, and it might work. It's just not formally supported. I mean, frankly, CF 2023, which came out in May of last year, says it only supports SQL Server 2019 and 2022. But I know people that are still running SQL Server 2016 and 2012 and even 2008, believe it or not. Yes, you might find that even old things still work, but it's not formally supported by Adobe. So if you go to them with a problem, they're going to say, we don't support that thing. So just beware. And I do believe, and anybody from CommandBox, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that CommandBox always implements an OpenJDK if you tell it to use a particular Java version. It only offers OpenJDKs. I couldn't find any other. You have to remove the JDK 11.022. So sorry, maybe you're answering Andy Frayne. Beware, this is broken now, not found. What is broken? I don't know. When you say this is broken, what is the this, Andy, that you're referring to? Did you get that link from the Adobe website? So I haven't even gotten to this yet. Where do you get ColdFusion? So I guess we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here. I'll talk in a bit about where one can get Java versions, Java installers. Adobe offers a page. As of yesterday, they did not offer the latest Java version that came out Tuesday. They did not yet. Yeah. So let's be clear. Both Andy and Roman are talking about that page that Adobe has. And they're saying that even though Adobe had updated the link to suggest that they have the installer, when he tried it, it didn't work. And then Roman's offering a variation. Yeah. So I suspect Adobe would be quickly told about that and fix it. But we together, they're not here. We're not going to be able to solve that problem here. So please, let's put that aside for now. Sorry, I just got distracted by seeing the comment. I wanted to talk about it. So that brings us back to this point. Somebody might say, well, couldn't they just get the latest Java version from Oracle? Yes, you can. Again, that's getting ahead of ourselves. You can. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I'm more importantly saying Adobe doesn't support anything other than Oracle Java. Now let's finish this intro section on why should you update. Well, it's like anything, right? There's bug fixes, there's security vulnerability fixes, and I don't think, I'd mentioned it later, but I want to mention it now. These JVM updates come out quarterly, every 3 months on a schedule. January, April, July, and October. And like anything, they're including bug fixes and security fixes, and you should be on the latest available update to the Java version that your CFML engine supports. So Lucy, that would be Java 11, not 17, not 21. ColdFusion 2023, that would be the latest update of 17, and 2021 would be the latest update of 11. So anyway, you should keep it up to date for that reason. Now, if you do, and sometimes there's enhancements, and sometimes the CFML engines might take advantage of those over time. They're not going to tend to take advantage of them right away, but they might over time take advantage of them. And there you go. I did talk about that Java. I meant to later, and I forgot that I had it later as a bullet point. But yeah, we don't need to worry about that as CF users. Nope, you don't need to. And it has changed. Originally it was free, then for 11 it was paid, then for 17 it's back to free. And I have resources where I point you to the discussions of that. And of course you can just search it through, I was going to say Google, but now we got to say, whatever AI tool you like to use for asking questions. And there's a bunch, so we'll leave it at that. All right, so now moving on to actually performing the update. And now let's talk first about where to get it. So as the folks there were talking about, there is an Adobe site where they're offered, and let me hop out there and look at that. And I'll just tell you, if you just search for ColdFusion downloads, the words ColdFusion downloads, if you just search for that, it will come up as the first result. And it looks like my browser chose to come on. Cold Fusion download. I just want you to, when you're looking for it yourselves, how are you going to find it? My browser to give me to the link here directly. So whether you're using Bing or whatever, DuckDuckGo, just pay attention. You want the thing that says download Cold Fusion. Now, you're not going to be able to download Cold Fusion installers from here, but if you click on that link, you're taken to the Adobe downloads page. And just wait a moment for it to come up. Probably a lot of people trying to get to it right now because of the updates to Java. But I want you to notice this. And again, Adobe doesn't make their site dark. My browser is configured to make sites dark. So anyway, the most important thing is to note that there's this drop down at the top. And it used to be different. It used to be that everything was on one big page. And then about a year ago, they went to this approach of separating the different things related to CF 2023 in one page, 2021 in another page. They still have 2018, which we could argue they shouldn't anymore, but they do. And then look, Java installers. So when I click on that, this page is going to change to focus on Java installers. Now, I want you also to notice that they say we try to make sure that the updates are available, but we don't always right away make sure. So just know that if anything arises, they'll fix it. And more importantly, and I got them to add this, I'm really glad they finally did, they clarify this. It's no longer just me keeping that table up to date. And it is also available in the system requirements document, but nobody was looking at those things. So they finally tell you, look, 2023 supports Java 17, 2021 supports Java 11. And they say JDK, same thing. Don't worry about that. And they don't mention 2018 anymore because it's no longer supported. All right, moving on. And by the way, because they still support the API manager and that still supports Java 8, we're going to see they still offer Java 8. So anyway, if we scroll down the page, look, there's 17, Java 17, and there's 10, 9, 8, 7. And then there's 11.022, 21, 2019, and then 401 and 391 and 381 and 371. Now, normally they only keep the top 3 most recent releases, but this just came out this week. 17.010 came out this week. 11.022 came out this week. I'm going to go ahead and click on that since that's what the guys were talking about. When I pick on that 11.022, I want you all to notice that they offer the Linux installers, the Mac installers, the Solaris installers, and the Windows installers. And by the way, I say installers, there's a Debian and RPM installer, then there's a TarGZ, there's a DMG, then there's and they don't offer a zip, which is interesting. But anyway, they offer the x64 and for M1 and M2, the Arch 64. So you have to pay attention to them, which one you want for what OS and whatever architecture you're using. And then Windows has both an exe and a zip, just like the Linux did. And we'll talk later, but I'll mention it now in case I don't remember the order. The installers will literally install the Java for you into a by default directory they offer you, and you just run the installer and it's done. The zips or the TarGZ or the zip, you extract them and you put them wherever you want them to be. So just be aware there is that distinction. And in fact, let me grab this link and put it in the slides because I didn't have that. And here's where I was gathering up the alpha version, or sorry, the links. Apologies again for you're seeing how the sausage is made. But I want to do that before I forget. So I'll get that corrected and uploaded to the site shortly. All right, moving on. Now, that's the Adobe site for getting Java installers and zips and TarGZs, which is great. But until today, they didn't have that newest update that came out on Tuesday. So not Tuesday, not Wednesday. And if anybody was looking for those things Tuesday or Wednesday, they could have cried foul, hey, it's not there. And I've reminded Adobe, they should be able to get this posted in advance. The schedule is known, but they don't. So anyway, let's move on. I want you to know you can go get these from Oracle. Now, again, I'm talking about Cold Fusion people. You can go to Oracle's website and get the new version. And somebody might go, wait, I was told we shouldn't do that. Well, I've compared the installers. They're binary identical. As long as they're the exact same version, sometimes Oracle comes out with a slight minor point release. It's been perhaps a week or two later, and Adobe may or may not add that. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But I'm just saying, if they're the same installer or the same tar-gz or same zip, I've compared them and they're binary identical. And when you either run the installer or extract the zip, there's a license in there and you're agreeing to that license. So there's no difference. And somebody might say, well, you're supposed to get it from Adobe's site. Okay. But if you want to get it from Oracle's site, I'm just saying they're binary identical in every test I've ever done. So therefore, I can't see why you shouldn't be able to get it from there if you really want to get it and don't want to wait for Adobe to put it on their website. That's all I'm saying. And, also people on Lucy and Command Box can get it from OpenJDK. And I'm sorry, I should have added that to that. But again, my focus of this talk was primarily CF people, and I'm passing on the extra information for the others as we go. Now let's talk about automation URLs. When we were just on that website, I just want you guys to notice when you right click over any of these things, down at the bottom, you can see the URL, or I'll just right click on it and say copy link. And some of you are going, come on, Charlie, you don't need to tell people that. Well, I just want you to see that Adobe's not masking the URL. There is the URL. So you can take that URL and you can, do a curl or a wget or anything you want to do to automate the prospect of getting that URL. So there it is. It's not behind any kind of a login like some other things are. It's not. So go to town. And they were saying, Roman and Andy were saying, or it's not Andy, somebody at Andy Frame Services was saying this stuff. Well, yes. So if there's a problem there, and what did they say? Remove the JDK 11.0.22. So it looks like they were saying, Roman was saying that if you take that out, then it would work. Well, I'll just go ahead and hit enter and see what happens. Yep, there it is downloading. So good for you, Roman. Thank you for that. And again, hopefully Adobe will see it and fix it. You should send them an email, CF support, cfsup@adobe.com. Send them an email. Tell them that's got a broken, and it's probably all of them. I didn't pay attention, but I'll just look at the Windows one. Yep, same thing. And again, this just was updated today. That's if you want to get 11.0.22 today. That's not a problem with the 11.0.21. I've been getting those for months because that came out in October. Anyway, let's move on. So how do you install it? Now, that's an interesting question. I said this in passing. I'm going to repeat it. There's an installer and there's a zip or a tar-gz. And there is a difference between them, and it's an important difference to be aware of. If you run the installer, it asks you where to put it. If you extract the zip, you tell it where to put it. And you might go, okay. But here's the thing, and I talk about this later, but I'll talk about it now. When you run the installer, now, since January of last year, it will presume to install into like a JDK 11 folder without any version, not JDK 11.0.22, just JDK 11. And 17 will implement into JDK 17. And that's can be a good thing or a bad thing. I'll talk about that later, but I'm just letting you know that if you run the installer, you should be paying attention to that, because if CF is running, or if Lucy is running, and you have it pointing to a folder where you'd put a previous version in the same folder, like JDK 11, had 11.0.21 in it. Well, if CF's running, when you run that installer, it's not going to be able to write to it because CF's pointing to it or Lucy's pointing to it. So you do have to be careful about that. Again, I'll talk about this later. I'm just saying that's a facet of the installer where it's nice that it asks where you want to put it. It's nice that it picks a default. And if you choose that default, okay, but just beware, you could have this problem where CF is running or Lucy's running and pointing at it. It wouldn't be able to update it correctly, and it may or may not warn you about that. The zip archive approach, at least you pick where to put it, and you can change on the installer where to put it. So again, I'm just giving these heads up to be aware of. In fact, let me just go ahead and do it real quick. Because I'm sitting here on a Windows box, I'm going to go ahead and get if it works. Yep. Now look at that. Oh wait, that's 21. My bad. Let me get let's see if the 2022, yeah, it didn't work. So I'll just go up there and thank you for Roman's tip. Because again, this just came out today. I hadn't even had a chance to try it yet. I got it from Oracle and ran it already, but here it is from Adobe. So anyway, when that's done, I'm on Windows. I'm going to go ahead and run the installer. And in fact, while I'm waiting for that, let me go back to get again, I could have shown you old ones, but I'm just wanting to go ahead and give you what's going on with the latest ones, just in case that's a whole nother. Think about it. That was CF 2023 I'm running. So let me get the Java 17 version. Remember, CF 2023 works with Java 17. And look at that. The 17 one didn't have the mistake that the 21 one did. So that was just a mistake in the 21. The Java 11.0.22 had the problem. The 17.0.10 does not have that problem. And I'm going to go ahead and get the zip while we're at it. And so, yes, I know I've got 3 things downloading, but I've got, fiber, and it's pretty fast. So sometimes the slowness is on the Adobe server side. Remember, that was a downloads dot something. Might even said Macromedia. Anyway, the point is it's on their server, and they're probably got a lot of people trying to pull these things down now. In fact, while we're waiting for this, let me make a little note. I've seen mentioned in the Java community, the wider Java community, hey, everybody, you don't need to go through the Oracle site and log in. You can just go to this Adobe site, and you can download Java from the Adobe site. And that's because they realize it's the same Java that Oracle is offering. Now, I'm sure somewhere somebody's cranky about that. But anyway, the point is there may be more than just ColdFusion people clamoring to download these available Javas, making this be a little bit slow. Well, anyway, I'll go ahead and do the 11 one just because it's already there. I just want to show you. I just run the installer, and it takes a moment, of course, to run. Got stuff going on. The downloads are stealing CPU as well as, come on, I got a pretty fast machine. This shouldn't be this slow. I kind of wonder if it really did it. So I'm going to try one more time. Apologies. There's times when I wonder if I should record these things up front just so these little weird anomalies don't hold us up. Oh, come on. Wake up. It's not that bad of a machine. It really should have already opened by now. I'm going to do this just in case somehow my browser's just acting funky. So and then there's the 17. I'm going to go ahead and run that 17 one because I'm running 2023. And those who run Windows may know that when you run that installer, it pops up and asks you to okay it as an administrator privilege thing. And there you go. And I just want you to notice, if you haven't done this or it's been a while, when you run it, you just accept that and say next. And then pay attention. I'm saying by default, since January of last year, it now goes to, by default, program files, Java, JDK 17 or JDK 11. No number, no dot, whatever, nothing. So good thing, bad thing. Well, if I have CF 2023 running right now, and let me just look real quick. I was going to talk about this stuff later, but let me just cover it now. Yep. So here's my Java 7, my CF 2023 JVM config. Again, I'm getting ahead of myself, but that's not currently pointing at the JDK 17 folder. It's pointing at a number one. I did the extraction of the zip for 1709, and I put it in that. Now, I could right now change this to point to 17.010. I could do that. I could click that change button, but there's an argument to be made for it's nice that it's always in the same folder. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and do that because I don't currently have ColdFusion pointing at it. I'm going to go ahead and do that, and it's going to run. And if you guys haven't done this, it's real fast installing it. Now, I'll say again, for those who never run the installer, they just extract the zip. That's cool. Do the extraction of the zip. You tell it where to put it. It is saying something's using it. Now, that wouldn't be ColdFusion. It could be, it probably is Visual Studio Code now that I think about it, because I'm using CF Builder. It's perhaps pointing at that Java 17 process, and it's saying, hey, there's a program that's running. Now, this is too bad. I mean, good, bad. It's good that we see the problem and I can show you how to solve it. It says it's process ID 1920. And this is on Windows 11, so it's a little different if you're on older versions. But if I come in here and just go to Java, there's a 1920. And I had configured it to show the command line. I do that just all the time because it's very helpful to look over here and say, well, what is that? And I still can't tell by looking at that, but we know it's not ColdFusion 2023. So I'm going to presume it's VS Code. I'm just going to go ahead and close this. It's too bad we have to do that, but anyway. And then I'm going to come back here and get to that Java list and see if that 1920 went away. Now, this is a little side note. It could have been that. And it takes time for that to go away. Even though you closed CF Builder, VS Code running CF Builder, it launches a Java in the background to help manage the CF interaction. Again, we're getting way beyond what we want to discuss in this talk. But the point is, I've seen that sometimes take a minute to go away. So that process is still there in 1920. And if I go back to that installer, I really didn't want to get into this level of detail, but the point is it's something you might encounter. So what the heck, we'll go ahead and do it. Now it's still not gone. So I'm just going to go take a quick look. I don't think I had any other versions of CF running. Nope. I'm looking at all, I have all these CF versions. You can do that. I have all these running and none of them are running. So it can't be a Cold Fusion that's running. Could it be a command box? No, it doesn't. Command box doesn't look at that. Oh, goodness. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and just in case. I don't think that was looking at that, but we'll see. That would be funny if it was. Oh, Java's gone. And I think that may be just a timing thing. But anyway, it's gone. Whether it was my command box or whether it was the VS Code closure in the background. The point is that 1920 is gone. So if this happens to you, that's how you can do it. You can do it from the command line in Linux. You can do it from the command line in Windows with the task list command. But the point is, now when I say retry, it's going to go, yep, nothing else is, that process is not running. And that's, I mean, almost never happened before. So I'm not sure what that was about. But again, I've been tending to point to specific versions to avoid conflict. But I wanted to show you all that if you just tell it to install to the JDK 11 or JDK 17, you might have some process using it, and therefore you might get this warning that something's using it. And that's good news, and it ran the install. Now, when it's all done, then I wanted to open up VS Code and show you how you could change Cold Fusion to use it. And you can do that in the CF admin, or you can do it in what's called the JVM config file. And I kind of wanted this to finish before I opened it, but I'm going to go ahead and open it because it's taking too long. Oh, no, I shouldn't. Come on. I'll wait. Be patient. While I wait for that, Roman said this was a nice surprise when they changed that behavior. And I know you wrote that a few minutes ago. I don't recall what it was you were looking at. And let me add this. This is very interesting. It's all these various processes are that's new. I have never seen that. I have no idea what all those processes are. Therefore, I'm going to say this is a good opportunity to say, I've not seen this. I've done installs of the full installer since January of last year. I've never seen something like this. I'm going to opt to say thank you, but no thank you. And it's going to stop the install. And there's nothing wrong with that. It stopped the install. And then I'm going to, remember I told you I'd also downloaded I started to try to download. Yeah, there you go, the zip. So this is good. You know, again, if the installer works, great, use the installer. If something about the installer doesn't feel like it works well, you've got this other option. Check it out. There's the zip. Sorry, where my mouse is. There's the zip. I'm just going to double click on it. And in Windows, it just opens up the zip. You don't have to extract it. I know people do. I'm not saying it's wrong, but you don't have to. I'm now in the zip. I'm in the zip. And there is the 17010 folder that if I'd extracted it, it would have been put wherever I told it to put it. Well, I like to do it this way. I'm going to copy it to the clipboard, and I'm going to go to that program files folder where I had my Javas. You can put it wherever you want, but I'm going to just keep it kind of consistent and go to program files. I don't know why my machine is acting up. It's just the demo gods, right? But anyway, program files Java. And I've got these various versions I've implemented for various purposes. And I'm just going to paste into that folder, that JDK 17010. I copied the folder called JDK 17010, and it's copying that folder. I know it says all that, but it's copying that folder. And in a moment, it's going to drop in down there. And by the way, this slowness, I'll just tell you guys, I've seen this be because Windows Defender, or if you had other antivirus tools on, these modern antivirus tools for the past few years, they scan everything you're updating. So every file, you know, there's maybe several hundred files in here. It's looking at every file, scanning it, making sure there's no virus. So that slows it down. Sometimes I'll go turn off Defender, and you'll see this thing just boom, run immediately. And you don't have to turn off all of Defender. You can just turn off what's called the real-time real-time scanning. Gosh, what a shame that stuff is happening right now. Of all times for things to slow down. We got 15 minutes left. While we wait for that, was talking about the removal of the version number. Right. And so, Roman, let's talk about that. He's saying, he thought it was a nice surprise when they switched to that. I'll tell you guys that I did a blog post. Let's just hop out and look at that real quick. I did a blog post back then. It was in January of 2022. So I'm going to go down here and pick. Here you go. I'm going to pick 2022. Sorry, it was January of 2023. My bad. It was January 2023. So I'm going to pick January of 2023. And look at this. And I was pointing this out, which is another facet of what we were discussing. And I was going to talk about it later, but let's talk about it now. It puts it in a JDK folder with no number, and it will remove the older JDK installs of that version. So if you had used that installer, let's say of 11, and you had 11.02 and 11.010 and 11.017 and 18, well, when this one came out as of 11.018, another facet of that installer is it would remove those earlier ones that the installer had installed. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not saying it'll remove older ones of other versions. Nope, it won't do that. Will it remove ones you extracted from a zip? Nope, it won't do that. It just removes prior versions, prior updates that the installer had installed, been used to install in the past. So again, you can check out that blog post yourself from January of 2023. Goodness gracious, look at that. There's definitely something wonky going on. We'll tell you what, in the interest of time, I'm just going to go ahead and show you. If I go to Defender and under this virus and threat protection and manage settings, and this is all being recorded so you can watch the recording later. This thing called real-time protection, I'm just going to momentarily turn it off because I'm on my machine. I'm the only one on my machine. I'm okay doing that for a moment. I'm turning it off. It says it's off. And I just want to see if that would make this suddenly speed up because, man, it says it's going to take 10 minutes. I sure hope that it's going to speed up. That is just so weird. That I had never seen. And this is just more classic demo God stuff. There's no reason that that should be hung up. There's nothing popping up down here saying something's in the way. I don't have any other antivirus tools. I know people are going to think about a lot of different things. Man, that's really, what a pisser. All right, I'm going to move on. I don't have time to wait for this. We got to get going. What I'm going to tell you is let's go ahead and I'm going to open up. Well, I'm going to show you by going the way you would typically go to it. If I had CF running, you can go to the CF admin and change it in the admin, but I like to do it not in the admin. So if we go to, goodness gracious, yeah, it will let me do that. Okay. Gosh. It's just suddenly everything's very slow underneath me. And I could go digging into finding out why that's so, and it could be something that'll blow my mind, but I don't want to waste time for you guys. So I have my ColdFusion installed on my D drive, and I'm going to go look at my ColdFusion 2023. Really sluggish. And it's nothing running except that extraction of that zip. It doesn't make any sense. But anyway, so in your ColdFusion folder, for just change gears, everybody pay attention. In your ColdFusion folder, let's talk about ColdFusion for now. Under CFusion, or if you install another instance under the instance name, then in bin, bin. So ColdFusion, CFusion, bin. It's been true for every release since CF10. And in 9 and earlier, it was a slightly different folder. But since 10, it's always in ColdFusion, CFusion, bin. And it's called JVM config, jvm.config. And I have that configured to open up in VS Code. So in a moment, VS Code will open, and there you go. And in that JVM config, usually you will see the first uncommented line being a line looking like this that says the Java home is the ColdFusion version you're running. It has a JRE folder. It comes with a Java. They call it the JRE folder. They always have, but don't worry about that. JRE, JDK, it doesn't matter. For our purposes, it doesn't matter. And what you can do is change that. So notice what I had done. I'm just going to say this and move on. I had changed that Java home value. I duplicated the line and commented out the earlier one. And you do have to do that because Java uses the first one it finds. It's not like code where it uses the second one or the last one. You have to comment out the first one, and then you point to that JVM version, whatever you're changing it to. And notice that it's on Windows. I have to use double slashes. If you don't do that, trust me, there will be trouble. And just do the double slashes. And I cover that in various other talks and stuff like that. So anyway, let's move on. And there's other resources. So you just do that, you change that, you save the file, and you restart ColdFusion. And on the restart, it now is using that version. It's as simple as that. Now, it's really unfortunate that it took us all this time, probably about 15 minutes, because of the crap with the installers and the zip extraction. It makes no sense. It's truly just a couple-minute job. You run the installer or you extract the zip and you point CF at it and you restart CF. That simple. And you keep that editor open. If somehow CF doesn't start, remember, you commented out the old one. You swap the comments, save the file, restart ColdFusion, it's back up. That's the beauty of that approach. I know there's other approaches, but I just like that approach because you can easily recover. If you haven't deleted anything, you haven't wiped anything out, and you can easily go back to the old version. And I covered that while we were going, and I covered that while we were going. And I'll just say, don't know if I have CF running. But in the CF admin, there's, you all know, there's a Java and JVM page. Just take my word for it. There is a Java and JVM page in the CF admin, and it's where you'd set the heap size. Well, at the top of it, it says, what's the Java home? And it points to that path that entry in that line in that file points to. And you can change it in that admin interface, or you can change it in that file. I'll just say one more time, if you change it in the admin and you make any mistake, or it's not the right JVM, or something not installed right, well, guess what? When you restart ColdFusion, you can't get back into the admin because CF won't start. So that's why I really prefer the JVM config approach. And let me say that for Lucy, there's an equivalent set of files if you run on Linux. And then in Lucy on Windows, some of you know that there's a Tomcat W, or let me just call it up. They call it the Lucy Tomcat Service Control. The Lucy Tomcat Service Control. And some of you who've done this stuff, you maybe will recall this, and others will be like, wait a minute, I didn't know there was such a thing. Yes. And it'll come up in a moment. Come on. There you go. And that is like a Tomcat UI that Lucy has embedded. Again, this is for those using Lucy on Windows. If you're using Linux, I'm not talking to you. I'm saying, and if you use the Lucy installer, not the Lucy Express. But if you do the install, I'm just saying, everybody talks about how to do things the other way. But if you've run the Windows installer for Lucy, and I didn't choose to do that, then you've got this thing, which again in the service, the menu was the Lucy Tomcat control program, and it's got this interface. And in here, it's got a tab that says, where is the Java? And in this case, it points to the Lucy JRE. They chose to implement a JRE, and it points to its bin server JVM DLL. Well, if you get a new version and you put it in a new folder, you'd point this to that new folder. And in particular, you'd have to remember to add this bin server JVM DLL, because this program, this Tomcat program that Lucy's using, expects it to point to not just the folder like ColdFusion does, but specifically within that folder, the bin server JVM DLL. Okay. So again, you don't hear many people talk about this stuff. And by the way, this is also where you set the heap size on a Windows install of Lucy. This is where you set the heap size, not in the various SH files or bat files or anything like that. All right, so let's move on. And I showed you how easily you could revert by just swapping comments. In the case of ColdFusion, just swap the comments in the file. In the case of Lucy, you just swap save what you put in there and put it back if you need to. And then in Command Box, I'll just show you again in the interest of time. We're running short on time. Here's a page on the Command Box site, and it talks about how to change Java versions either at startup or setting permanently in, and I'll just leave you to read about that. And when you start an instance or configure an instance, you can tell it to use the version you want. Now they, as far as I know, only support OpenJDKs, not Oracle JDKs. And again, people run ColdFusion with OpenJDKs and it works. I'm not saying it won't work, but it's just not formally supported. All right, let's move on. Sorry about that. As far as Docker containers are concerned, let me say this about that, because some of you may be interested in this, and I apologize. I see we're getting near the top of the hour. We've got a bunch of topics still to cover. I'll cover them quickly because they are covered elsewhere, and I can point you to resources for more. But I want to show you this because I didn't put any links in here. If you just Google, whatever search engine you like to use, Awesome Compose, there's a site called Awesome Docker Compose with examples. Well, I created a variant of that called Awesome CF Compose. Awesome CF Compose. And why is it not coming up? It should be. Oh, look, Google said, I'm showing you the results for Awesome Compose. If you really mean to do CF Compose, click here. Thank you very much, Google. You're so kind. Pay attention to that. Sometimes you will be misled by thinking something doesn't exist and it's Google switched gears on you. And they think they're helping you, but in this case, it was hurting us. Again, come on, wake up, wake up. There you go. And the very first result, check it out, is my GitHub repo called Awesome CF Compose. Now, again, I know some of you use containers, Docker, Kubernetes, whatever. You might say, I don't use Compose. Doesn't matter. You can use what I offer here, very simple little Compose files, and easily create a Docker file of your own choosing. But I want you to notice I've got all these variants of different kinds of things. I'm not going to go over this now, but among the various different things, check it out. I've got one called specific Java version. So I've got a Compose file with a Docker file. In this case, it is a Docker file because in order to use a specific Java version, I use a combination of, so here I'm using when I wrote it, it was the CF 2021 container. I'm using that URL like I showed you. You can automate this. And here I was getting the 11.0.17. So I do a wget in my Docker file, and then I install it just like you would. And then the trickery here, it's not much, is I use a sed command. For those who know Linux, I do a sed command that goes into that JVM config and modifies that Java home line to use that Java version. So I'm just saying, if you want to use containers, whether you get them from Adobe or Lucee or Command Box, all of them have images. You could do something like this. With Command Box, you can use that other approach. With Lucee, you'd have to find the right file. I'm saying with ColdFusion, we know from our discussion, it's the JVM config. Here I'm using sed to edit JVM config, point to that new Java version. And when this container starts, it's going to start using that Java version. So yes, you can control very easily all these different versions. Now, the gotchas, let me just wrap up by going through these relatively quickly. Sorry, that was a little bit, disjointed and held up. Apologize for that. So I said that when you skip to latest Java versions, you want to be aware that prior versions you're skipping might have introduced some feature that you might trip over. Now, if you're on the immediately preceding version, maybe this won't be an issue. Like this was an issue in the July 2023 update. And I mean of 11 and 17, and in that case, 20, and now 21, they all have this behavior. And it's this thing that if you either read the tech notes from the Java updates or read a blog post I did, you'll see in July 2023, I did a blog post on the subject. Oracle and the Java community and the OpenJDKs as well implemented something they called zip64 extra field validation. You might go, what the hell's that got to do with anything I'm running? Well, you're right, it doesn't on the surface, but under the covers it does, because in our case with ColdFusion I'm talking about, you will find that if you update to a Java version greater than from July 23 or later, you will find that you can't run the ColdFusion updates from the admin anymore. They will break. And that's the blog post I wrote, as I found out, hey, after I updated back in July to the newest JVM, the CF admin update wouldn't work. Now, some of you didn't notice right then because maybe you did the Java update weeks or months later. Well, I did it that very day, and I tried to do a CF update because they were coming out back in July with security updates, and I experienced this problem. So in my blog post and in Adobe's resources about that updates at that time frame, they talk about how to add a particular JVM argument to make it be that you can run the installer. And it's actually not a JVM argument you add to the ColdFusion admin. It's a JVM argument you add when you run a command line install of the CF update. Now, I'm not going to get into that. That's a whole separate subject. I covered that kind of stuff doing ColdFusion updates in a previous talk on updating ColdFusion. In fact, let me look real quick in the browser here. Yep, in my second tab. I've got a lot of talks I've given on all kinds of subjects, and let me just do a find on updating. Keeping CF and Java updated, challenges and solutions. So, I talk about all kinds of stuff related to updating CF and updating Java in this talk from June of 2020, and you can find that on my website. But again, this particular thing, I'm saying that's covered in a blog post that I did in July, and I believe August I covered it again. And I think I had another reason to cover it again in October. And there's some subtlety about it, but I don't want to belabor the discussion right now. Check out those blog posts to learn more. Just quickly, if you're on the very latest updates of CF, going forward, this is no longer a problem. Adobe did something to fix it. But if you were on a prior update and you try to go to this latest update, you will find you may have a problem. You have to have been on the immediately prior update. And I'm sorry, I'm not evasive, but I just don't want to bog us down with all the details. Read the blog posts, including one I did in October that explains it, because there was an update Adobe came out with in October, and that started the process of fixing this problem. And there was an update in November where if you were on the update from October, when you went to the one from November, all was well. Bottom line is, once you get to the one from November, any subsequent future updates will be very simple, won't have this problem. Let's move on. I mentioned the Java installer change. This is literally Oracle's installers from January 2023. That was a big deal, and I wanted to make sure I covered that, but we already did, so I'm going to move on. Then back in October 2022, there was a JVM update. Then remember, they're January, April, July, and October. So there was in October of 2022 an update where Oracle and the Java community and the Open JDKs as well implemented a protection that said we will not trust jars signed with what's called SHA-1 if they were created after January of 2019. It was a really weird obtuse sort of thing. Well, again, I covered that in a blog post and at the time, and in other blog posts I've done about updating Java. I point you to this. So I'll just say you can read about that on my blog post. And in fact, this is a good time to stop and point you to, started out here looking at this. I did a blog post just this week, called Several Things to Consider When Applying JVM Updates. And I did it because I've been providing this information. Look down here. Beware the change here, beware the change there, beware the change there. I've been providing this information in a blog post I would do whenever there was a new Java update. And I realized, man, that was making that a big, long post. So this week I split it out. It's its own post. And I covered these very topics. There's the thing about the zip validation. There's the thing about the installer. There's the thing about the SHA-1. So you can come read this blog post from this week and go right to that section where I cover if you may be skipping to a JVM update and your earlier ones were before October, you're going to hit this problem that was new as of October 2022. And I discuss it and I point you to the blog post. So again, let's leave it at that. And the last thing was TLS version issues. So again, and I point this out because sometimes people are updating, let's say our CF Java version from 2 or 3 years ago. And so you could encounter a problem related to this. And what that update back then did was it said Java can no longer make calls out to servers that don't support at least TLS 1.2 or above. And you might go, oh, what's that got to do with me? Well, you might have a mail server configuration in your CF admin. You might have a data source pointing to a database server running somewhere. And if that server, if you're talking to it via, SSL TLS, if that server doesn't support at least TLS 1.2, then as of that April 2021 update, you'd find that CF or Lucy could not call out to that other server. And you're like, what did Adobe do? Or what did Lucy do? Why doesn't it work? And it's not them, it was Oracle or the OpenJDK project. So in that blog post that I did back then, I explained how you can fix it. There's a Java security file where you could say, hey, I still need to talk to dirty old servers that still use TLS 1.1. You know, that may not be in your control. You maybe can't influence that. So I know, again, I'm saying things in brief. Remember the blog post. I have that covered in there, right there. Beware a change in April about calls out to anything running TLS 1.1 or earlier. You can come back and read this brief thing and then see my elaborated blog post from back then where I cover it in more detail. All right. I want to cover this before we wrap up. If you are updating a JVM, just be aware if you or somebody you work with has updated certificates in what's called the CA certs, the certificate store, if they have imported certificates into the CA certs of the JVM you're about to update, when you go to the new JVM, those certificates that you imported are not going to be in the new one. So it's on you to consider, should you import those certificates into the new JVM? And I know that's going over the head of some of you, but for those who know what I'm talking about, I'm just saying, be aware. If you or somebody did an import of a certificate into the old JVM, you need to think about, should you import that certificate into the new JVM? And I say you should think about it because maybe you shouldn't. You might think, oh, of course I need to. Oh, no, maybe you don't need to. I have helped many people over the years who were carrying old certificates around like a boat anchor from one JVM update to another, constantly importing it over and over again. And I said, hey, wait, stop. Can we just not do the import and check the thing that you said failed unless you did the import? It might have been a CF HTTP call, or it might have been a mail server TLS call, or it might have been a database, whatever. You were calling out to something that failed unless you imported the certificate. And I said, well, let's just don't import the certificate. You've updated the JVM. Let's just see if just updating JVM did the job. Well, sure enough, often it will have done the job. And you might go, wait, what? And that's because sometimes you don't need a new certificate. You just needed a more up-to-date certificate. The old one was relying on root certs that in the old JVM weren't there. And so, and again, I don't want to get into the weeds on this stuff, but just trust me, sometimes all you got to do is update the JVM and you find you don't need a certificate to be added anymore. Now, sometimes you do. It might be literally like a public-private key thing. That's different. If you need the cert, you need the cert. I'm saying if you don't need the cert, maybe you don't need it. That's a bigger subject than we're going to get into today. Let's move on. Now, finally, if you change major versions, I'm talking about if you have ColdFusion and a version that was supporting one version and goes to supporting a new version, Adobe says, hey, we now support this new version. It hasn't happened in 2023, didn't happen with 2021, didn't happen with 2018. 2016 was the last time this happened. You might remember I said it started out supporting Java 8 and it went to supporting Java 11. Well, if you do switch a major Java version under ColdFusion, then you need to be aware that you'll pretty much almost certainly need to do what's called clear the CF classes. I'll just say quickly, the CF classes is a folder that ColdFusion writes the Java classes that it builds from your ColdFusion code. Literally, when you run a CF template, it gets converted to Java. And there's a default option in CF admin to save it to it's called save the class files. It saves it to this CF classes folder. And that way it doesn't have to keep recompiling it whenever you restart ColdFusion. It's already compiled and saved. Well, the problem is if it's compiled with Java 8 and you move to Java 11, stuff may not work right. So this would be a time when it would be in your interest to clear the CF classes. And there's also other times when certain updates come out and Adobe will say in the update tech notes, hey, because of that change in some Java signature, we're asking you to clear the CF classes. So that's another subject about which we could have a lot more discussion. I should maybe even do a whole talk on it because there's some interesting other things you can get from looking at that CF classes. But again, I don't want to bog us down talking about that. Let's move on. Some people would argue we don't use it, we don't need it, you shouldn't use it. That's not the right answer in everybody's case either. But again, this is not the time to get into that. Lastly, I want to say again, if you move from a major Java version that CF uses, you may find that when it tries to start, it fails to start. And if you go to the command line and start ColdFusion, it might say it's trying to find some MSVCR, some number DLL. And in that case, again, Adobe, back when CF 2016 came out with the new support for Java 11, they said at the time in their tech notes, hey, be aware you might need to copy this file. I'm just saying people don't tend to read stuff, right? They just try stuff. And you might find that you may need to do this copy of this file from the JVM that you're implementing into the CF lib folder. Again, I don't have time now to get into that in depth, but it's covered in Adobe's resources when they tell you that they support a new Java version. And that might happen soon if they soon support Java 17 for CF 2021. We'll be going from 11 to 17, and you'll have to face these issues. Or they may soon support Java 21 in either CF 2023 or 2021, and we'll have to deal with going to 21. So anyway, let's move on. Don't want to get lost in the weeds. Finally, I just want to remind you that yes, if you do run multiple instances of CF, each of them has their own JVM and therefore its own JVM config. I showed you how I went to the CFusion folder and it's bin JVM config. Well, if you're running another instance called Bob, Bob's going to have a Bob folder with bin JVM config, and it's his own JVM config. And you need to do that change that I showed you, either in the admin for Bob or in the JVM config for Bob. Just saying, each instance has its own JVM, so you have to pay attention to that. Finally, how to be made aware of JVMs, and we're going to try to wrap up. Sorry, we're going 15 minutes over. We will, by the time we're done, have taken 15 minutes over. Apologize for that. But anyway, how do you know about new Java versions? Well, one, I want to tell you, as I've said over and over, Oracle does schedule these updates. I know they're called critical patch updates, CPUs, but they're just the updates, and they are quarterly, and they're the third Tuesday of January, April, July, and October. So you can prepare for this. I prepare for it. Don't know why Adobe doesn't seem to prepare for it. But anyway, moving on, you can prepare for it. And then you can also be made aware of it by looking in the release notes, because they literally, Oracle shows in their release notes, they have various pages where they talk about this is the schedule. So you can be looking at that. Then some of you know that Pete Freitag, great contributor to the CF and Lucy communities, has a service he calls Hack My CF. That sounds scary. It's not about hacking into your CF. It's basically saying, I'm going to do checks of the security of your CF and Lucy configuration. So check out hackmycf.com. One of the benefits is that he will tell you when a new version comes out if you have not updated to it. He will be able to detect. You will implement things in such a way that he can know this stuff about your server, and it's all very secure. And it's a paid service, but it's a valuable service, and it's worth the money for many, many people. And I say everybody should consider using it. It's just great. It tells you all kinds of potential security configuration issues about your CF or Lucy. Anyway, moving on, check it out. He will let you know if you have failed to keep it up to date. That's a big plus. And then Adobe sometimes announces it in the CF forums or in the portal. So keep an eye out. Other times people will raise it. I raise it. I do both blog posts and I tweet. So I tweet the day it comes out to let people know, because again, I know not everybody's paying attention to the fact that it's quarterly. So I let you know. And then I try to do a blog post on it. I missed the one in December, October. I missed the one in October because I was just overwhelmed with a lot of updates back then from CF and Fusion Reactor, and I just got lost in the weeds. But anyway, I did one this week on the new update that came out this week, and it'll be easier because now I won't have all that stuff to review. I'll just mention the new update and leave it at that. All right. Now, in conclusion, here's some of those links that I talked about. First of all, the URL to this recording itself, I'm putting this in the PDF. So when you get it, if you share it with somebody, they'll know, hey, how do I see this recording? There you go. That'll be the link to what you're watching right now. That's the meeting itself, and then the playlist of all the CF Meetup recordings. That's why it's a long URL. And then these slides, you can go there and find these already now, and I'll double check it when we're done. And we've made a couple tweaks. I'll tweak those couple things, and I'll post a new one, push it up, and it'll be there on the website. And then here's the blog post I talked about from this week about JVM update considerations, and then the one about the table of Java to CF versions, and then that page for the CF downloads for the Java installers, and then the page in the command box docs about updating Java. And finally, at least one page I found, and there's others, and this one doesn't talk about doing it the way I showed you. It talks about doing it more command line stuff. But anyway, there's various resources from the Lucy site about upgrading Java. Whew. All right. I've been watching. I haven't seen any more comments since then. So let me just say now's a good time. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and get them in there. But wrapping up, I just want to say, updating the JVM that underlies CF is very important, can be sometimes more important than others. It can be very easy. We hit a couple of interesting snags. I'm glad we did because it's helpful for you to see it. But usually it's very simple. I've never seen those particular problems before. And I help people update Java probably 20, 30 times per quarter because I have different people who say, hey, can you help us update it? It updates quarterly. So I'm doing it 20, 30 times a quarter, and I've never seen those particular problems. And I think that was just some quirk about my local environment. I happen to have VS Code open. I think there was that. I don't know what all those other processes were. That was weird. But anyway, remember, you could just skip to using the extraction of the zip, and then you won't run into any problem with the installer. And we've shown how there were various things to consider and then to be aware while you were doing it, and various ways, importantly, to be notified about available Java updates. So if you have any follow-up questions, again, you can reach out to me by email or on social media in all these different places at that very simple Carehart. And then the slides are already up there. All right. I haven't seen any questions or comments. So if there aren't any, I can't tell if you're typing. So I'm going to say if there aren't any questions or comments, thanks everybody for coming. I hope you enjoyed the talk. I'd always look forward to your feedback, whether you share it to me directly or in social media, whatever you like to do. I definitely appreciate your feedback. And again, I don't see anybody. This interface doesn't let me know if you're typing. So I'm going to presume if in the next 5-10 seconds, nobody has got any questions or comments. So go ahead and wrap up. Thank you, Drew. Well, again, a hard subject. It's like on the surface, it's pretty simple, but like so many things, the devil's in the details. Thank you for that. Yeah, I do look forward to doing more talks. I've just got a bunch of things. Like there's a couple things I talked about today where I could spend a whole session on them. When people say there's nothing to talk about CF, I just go, I got a list of 1,000 things I want to talk about. The challenge is deciding what to talk about. All righty. All right. Well, it looks like that's it. So thanks everybody for coming along, and we will see you next time. I'll get the announcement out for whatever the next one will be shortly. Till then.